I stumbled across a comment online yesterday, someone describing a very specific, unsettling experience with a supposed academic publisher. Reading it felt wrong because it mirrored my own situation almost perfectly. It had been months since it happened, and I'd mostly filed it away as a frustrating, expensive mistake. But seeing someone else detail the same oddities, the same creeping sense of something not being quite right, made me want to write it all down. The revisions came back faster than the first round. Which, okay, good, efficient. I was starting to get anxious about the whole thing, not because I thought the paper was bad, it was solid work, honestly, but because of the speed. And the emails. They were always late at night, like 11 or 12, from this TAM person. Not a big deal, people have different schedules, but the specificity. This time, she'd commented on a minor point about my methodology, referencing a specific grant I'd applied for 2 years ago, one I hadn't gotten. It wasn't publicly announced who applied, just who was funded. I reread the email 3 times. She wrote, "Consider revisiting the power analysis given the limitations inherent in a sample size constrained by earlier funding applications." It felt targeted. I replied politely, pointing out that the power analysis was standard for the field, and a little defensive, I'll admit. Tam responded almost immediately. "Apologies, Dr. Albright, a nuanced point, certainly, simply aiming for rigor. I noticed your dissertation advisor was Dr. Bea Hansen, a formidable scholar. I admired her work on spatial cognition." That was weird. Bea had retired 5 years ago. She hadn't published anything significant in 10 years. I hadn't even mentioned Bea in my cover letter. I figured it must be some kind of advanced search algorithm. These predatory journals, even the ones pretending to be legitimate, they scrape everything, right? They're building a profile. It was unsettling, but logical. Then, a few minutes later, a new email. Not from Tam, from someone named Opal. "Just checking in on Dr. Albright's progress. Excited to see this work reach a wider audience. Your interest in the neurobiological correlates of implicit memory aligns beautifully with some upcoming special issues." Implicit memory wasn't even in the paper. It was a tangential interest I'd mentioned once, in a conference abstract 3 years ago. I shut down my email. I needed coffee. A lot of coffee. I started taking the long way to the library. It wasn't a huge detour, just a couple of extra blocks, cutting through the park instead of along Elm Street. It felt stupid, paranoid even, but the thought of running into Tam or Opal or whoever else was involved just made my stomach clench. It wasn't even that I thought they'd do anything. It was the feeling of being watched, like they knew my schedule. Then I got an email from Bea. The subject line was, "Regarding your work on temporal discounting." Temporal discounting? That was a throwaway section of my dissertation, something I barely passed as relevant. Bea said she was a junior editor with the publishing group and wanted to clarify a point about my methodology. She'd somehow found a comment I'd made on a blog 6 years ago about a statistical error in a paper on the same topic, a blog I hadn't thought about in years. I deleted the email without opening it. I started checking my email on my phone constantly. Every notification felt like a jolt. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were just incredibly thorough. Maybe this publisher was different, a really aggressive, data-driven outfit. But that didn't explain the personal details. It didn't explain how they kept finding these obscure, forgotten things. Yesterday, I'd left a coffee shop on University Avenue 10 minutes earlier than usual because I'd remembered I needed a specific book from the library. Then, this morning, an email from Samit referencing my sudden need for archival materials. He asked if I'd found what I was looking for. It wasn't a question, more like a statement, a knowing one. He signed it, with anticipation. I'm starting to think this isn't about the paper at all. It's about testing something. Like I'm part of some strange experiment. They're seeing how I react. And it's working. I'm reacting. It was the bird feeder. That's what finally shifted things. I'd mentioned to Jen, just in passing, how I'd finally gotten around to putting one up. She'd asked about it and said she liked watching the chickadees. Then Samit emailed. Not about the paper, not about my research, just a line, enjoying the goldfinches. I almost deleted it without reading. It was so off. Goldfinches hadn't even been at the feeder yet. Mostly sparrows, a couple of finches, nothing gold. I checked the security camera footage. It's a cheap one, motion activated, aimed at the driveway. And there, timestamped 2 hours before the email, was a flash of yellow. A single goldfinch landed, ate for 10 seconds and flew off. It wasn't the bird itself, it was the timing and the specificity. It was like they were anticipating my thoughts or causing them. I started seeing patterns everywhere. The way the barista at the coffee shop always seemed to be looking at me. The man walking his dog in the park, always taking the same route, always glancing my way. Were they following me? It felt coordinated. I decided I needed to talk to someone. Pearl. She's in the history department, a bit eccentric, but fiercely intelligent. I walked over to her office and didn't call first. I just showed up. She wasn't there, but her door was ajar, and I saw a stack of papers on her desk. Papers with my name on them, clippings, printouts of my old blog posts, even a photograph of me from a conference 2 years ago. And a note in a handwriting I didn't recognize. She knows too much. That's when I ran. Not to the police, not to Kurt, just away. I ended up at the bus station buying a ticket to anywhere, somewhere they wouldn't expect, somewhere safe. I don't think I even looked where the bus was going before I swiped my card. It's heading north, and I have this horrible feeling I'm not escaping anything. I'm being directed. The bus smelled like old coffee and regret. I kept looking at the people getting on at each stop, trying to decide if they were looking at me or just through me. It was exhausting. Finally, there was a town big enough to have a university. Not this one, obviously. I found a diner, one of those 24-hour places, and sat in a booth, trying to think. I needed to tell someone. I called Kurt. He was sympathetic, but distant. He kept asking about the paper, about what Pearl had said to me before she disappeared. He sounded more worried about my academic reputation than me. It felt wrong. Then I remembered Yael. She'd been at that conference with me, the one where I presented the fraudulent work. Yael was sharp. She wouldn't dismiss me. I found her number online and left a message rambling about Pearl, about the feeling of being watched, about the information in Pearl's office. She called back within 1 hour. I've heard of a couple of other cases, she said, her voice tight. People who publish through Academica Global, similar stories, disappearances, strange coincidences, feeling targeted. We spent hours talking, then started compiling a list, names, publication dates, anything we could find. I even started a document, meticulously detailing everything, intending to send it to a journalist. It felt powerful, finally having a record. Then Yael sent me a link. It was a graduate student directory for a small college in Vermont. A picture stared back at me. Samit. He wasn't a random acquaintance from the library. He'd been a student there, just a few years ahead of me, and listed under his extracurriculars, Research Assistant, Academica Global. I stared at the screen, relief flooding me. It was a scam, a predatory publishing ring extorting money from desperate grad students, maybe even using us for something. I don't know. But it had a source, it had a name, and I'd found it, until I noticed the date of the directory. It was from 10 years ago, and Samit wasn't listed as a former student. He was still enrolled, still studying, still there. It's been years. I still think about it, not constantly, but it surfaces. A face in a crowd, a particular shade of gray in the light. It's not trauma, not in the way people talk about it. It's more like a permanent recalibration. The world feels thinner somehow, more easily breached. I tried to track down more people who'd published with Academica Global after Yael and I connected. A few responded to my emails, mostly with fear and embarrassment. They'd all been contacted by someone claiming to be a reviewer, asking oddly specific questions about their methodology long after publication, things that no legitimate peer review would focus on. I remember one, Pearl, describing a phone call where the person on the other end seemed to know details about her personal life, things she hadn't shared with anyone at the university. I thought at the time it was about leverage. They were building a dossier, something to use against us if we tried to expose them. Blackmail, maybe. That felt logical. A clean motive. It wasn't until I realized how little money Academica Global actually made, the publication fees were surprisingly low, that the blackmail theory started to feel wrong. I haven't seen Samet or heard anything about him since. Yael lost contact with the other students she'd found. The police predictably weren't interested. A bad publishing house, they said, happens all the time. Now, I avoid academic conferences. Not the big ones necessarily, but the smaller, more focused gatherings. The ones where you end up sitting at a coffee table with someone trying to sound interested in your work. I just can't. I can't risk that initial conversation, the casual probing. I always feel like I'm waiting for the question that isn't a question, the one that tells me they already know too much. I order my coffee to go now, always, and I stand by the door. I still remember the chipped formica of the library table, a pale yellow with little flecks of darker color worn away around the edges. It was late in the semester, and I was desperately trying to finish a research paper, the kind you pour everything into, hoping it'll actually matter. I'd taken a temporary job shelving books there just to have quiet hours to work on it, and a colleague had offered to help me with the formatting. It felt generous at the time. The chipped formica of the Carols felt cold under my elbows. I was trying to wrestle with the bibliography, honestly, just getting the hanging indent right. It's stupid to get so hung up on formatting, but Professor Rue was particular. I'd been staring at the screen for 10 minutes, willing the citations to align, when Dex was suddenly there. "Still battling the margins?" he asked, leaning over my shoulder. It wasn't a startling appearance, exactly. He worked the late shift too. But the timing, I hadn't even sighed, hadn't even shifted in my seat. It was like he knew I was about to give up. "Yeah, it's ridiculous," I said, gesturing at the screen. "I've read the style guide 3 times. "Let me show you a little trick," he said, and before I could protest, he'd taken my mouse. He navigated to the paragraph settings, adjusted a few things, and boom. Perfect. See? Just a little tweak to the space before paragraph. Most people miss that. I blinked. That's exactly what it was. He shrugged, a little too casually, I thought. It's a common issue. I've helped a lot of students with it. That felt off. I'd only mentioned the paper to him once, in passing a week ago, and I hadn't even said I was struggling with the formatting. He hadn't been at the reference desk when I'd been venting to Jen about Rue's impossible expectations. Maybe he just overhears everything. The library is quiet, and he does seem to wander. A little nosy, maybe, but helpful. He was probably just being a good coworker. It was nice, honestly. A little weird, but nice. "Thanks, Dex," I said, trying to sound grateful and not like I was analyzing his every move. "Really appreciate it." He just smiled, a quick, tight thing, and wandered off towards the stacks. I glanced back at my screen, the perfectly aligned bibliography mocking me with its efficiency. I started taking the long way around the periodicals room, just in case. It felt ridiculous walking an extra 5 minutes to avoid a potential conversation, but the thought of Dex just appearing while I was focused on something else was getting to me. I told myself it was the stress of finishing my thesis, making me paranoid. I was probably just projecting, seeing patterns where there weren't any. Then came the email. It wasn't addressed to me directly, but it was forwarded to my account by mistake. A mass email from the university's academic publishing office announcing a new initiative, targeted support for emerging scholars. It listed criteria, very specific criteria, things like students with demonstrated research potential but limited publication record and those working in underrepresented fields. It sounded corporate. And then I saw the name listed as the program's coordinator, Dex. I stared at the screen. He hadn't just known about my bibliography. He'd known about my whole research struggle. He'd known I hadn't published anything, and he'd somehow gotten himself put in charge of a program specifically designed for people like me. I remembered him asking about my advisor, Rue, a couple of weeks ago. Just casual, "How's Professor Hawthorne going?" But now it felt like an information-gathering mission. He'd mentioned something about a new grant opportunity for grad students, too. I dismissed it at the time, but now I was replaying the conversation, picking apart every question. He hadn't been offering help, he'd been assessing. I decided to start working in the quieter section of the library, near the microfilms. It was out of the way, and Dex rarely went there, But when I got settled and looked up, there he was, reorganizing a shelf. He didn't look surprised to see me, just aware. He gave me that same little tight smile. He hadn't been stalking me, I reasoned. He was just efficient, a really, really efficient librarian. I kept avoiding the periodicals room, just taking the long way to the stacks, pretending I needed books from the other side of the library. It felt ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched whenever Dex was nearby. I told myself I was being paranoid. Thesis stress, too much caffeine. Then I got an email from the university. Not my department, not even a general student services address. It was from Academic Advancement Initiatives, and it outlined a new grant program, specifically for students working on projects like mine, struggling with access to specialized databases. The email included a link to an application and a name, Vaughn. Vaughn was coordinating the program. I clicked the link, and there was a photo. It was Dex. It couldn't be. It just couldn't. I scrolled down, reading the program details. It was almost exactly what I'd been complaining about to Dex weeks ago. The obscure journals, the travel funding for archival research, everything. I remembered him nodding, listening intently, always asking just the right questions. He hadn't been trying to help me, he'd been collecting information. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Vaughn wants to chat. Library meeting room B at 4 p.m. I didn't reply. I didn't even have his number. I went to Jen at the front desk. She said Dex had requested a temporary administrative override, access to university email servers a few weeks back. She said he was streamlining communications for a new project. Jen hadn't thought anything of it. Everyone knew Dex was thorough. I didn't go to meeting room B. Instead, I went back to my car, heart hammering. Maybe he was trying to build his own little empire, pulling strings, getting credit for helping students, a power play. It was awful, manipulative but not dangerous, right? It couldn't be. I started the engine, and as I reversed, I saw him, standing by the library entrance watching me leave. And he was holding a thick manila folder, my application. I realized. He didn't wave. He didn't even blink, just watched. And in that moment, I understood this wasn't about academic ambition. This was something else, something cold. I drove straight to campus security. It felt dramatic, even saying it like that, but sitting on it felt worse. I told Officer Rand everything about Dex, about Vaughn, the grant, the monitoring, and the folder. He listened mostly and kept clicking his pen. The clicking got to me. It was like he was cataloging my paranoia. He asked for proof. The email confirmations, the grant application, anything. I showed him everything. He took copies and said he'd look into it. He asked if I'd reported this to my department head. I hadn't. I said I wanted to go through security first. He raised an eyebrow and made a note. "Mr. Vaughn, is that a listed employee?" I asked. Rand checked his computer. No, Vaughn is listed as library staff. Dex is. He's been here for 15 years, with an exemplary record. 15 years. That didn't make sense. It was like he was two different people and both had perfect histories. Rand said he'd speak to Dex, maybe just a casual conversation. He would ask about the grant program and see if everything was on the up and up. He didn't seem concerned. He kept calling it a misunderstanding. A week later, I got a call from Jen at the front desk. Rand had spoken to Dex. Dex had explained everything. Apparently Vaughn was a nickname. He used it for a small independent funding initiative he ran outside the university to help promising students. He'd just been proactive, identifying potential applicants. Jen sounded embarrassed for me, like I'd wasted their time. She mentioned almost as an afterthought that Dex had been volunteering at the local historical society, digitizing their archives, and that he'd been doing genealogy research, specifically tracing the families of early university donors. I remember thinking maybe he was just trying to build connections, networking. A weird, obsessive way to get ahead, a little creepy, sure, but not malicious. I saw him a couple of times after that. He'd nod, a small, tight movement. He wasn't watching me anymore, not obviously, but I knew. I still knew. I just didn't know what I knew. And the library felt smaller, like the walls were closer. It's funny. The things you forget. Or maybe not forget. Exactly. Just compartmentalize. I haven't thought about Dex in years. Not really. His name comes up sometimes in department meetings. He left, of course. He took a position at a small liberal arts college in Vermont. Everyone said it was a good fit, that he wanted to focus on teaching. I remember Jen at the front desk mentioning, a few weeks after everything with Rue and Marcus fizzled out, that Dex had gotten a grant. It was a large grant for student research, something about supporting undergraduates in independent projects. I remember thinking, good for him. He always seemed so eager to help students, a little too eager maybe. He was always steering them towards certain journals, certain conferences. Looking back, those journals were obscure, predatory, even. I didn't know that word then. I just thought maybe he was trying to build their CVs quickly, give them a leg up. I started noticing the names. Students he'd championed, students who suddenly had multiple publications in these questionable places. It was unsettling. I even mentioned it to Hilda once, offhand. She just shrugged. She said everyone was under pressure to publish. I don't think it was about the publishing, not really. It was about control. He needed them to need him. I felt it then, a coldness in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't about academic ambition, it was something else. Now, I always ask Vaughn about the security protocols for the library's server room. I do this every 6 months. Just a quick check-in. He rolls his eyes, but he tells me. He always tells me. It's a small thing, but it feels necessary. I haven't spoken about this, not to family, not even to colleagues. It just settled into a place I didn't revisit. But I keep thinking about how easily things can feel right when they aren't. And I wanted to put that somewhere, get it outside my head. It happened during a work trip, a big conference in a city I barely knew, and it started with a conversation in a hotel lobby. The coffee was surprisingly good, hotel coffee. Usually it's well, you know, but this was decent. I was checking my emails, mostly conference updates and the occasional frantic message from my lab back home. Standard. I'd snagged a table near the window overlooking the street. It was a busy intersection with a lot of yellow cabs and people rushing even though it was a Tuesday morning. I was actually starting to relax. I needed this. I was looking at the conference schedule again, trying to decide if I really needed to sit through the panel on novel applications of Bayesian statistics. Honestly, it sounded like torture when I noticed him. The same man, the one from yesterday. He was standing by the magazine rack, just staring, not at anything, just outward. He'd been wearing the same tweed jacket. I remembered thinking it looked a little out of place, as everyone else was in suits or business casual. I caught his eye, and he blinked slowly. Then he turned away again, without a word. He just rotated his whole body and walked towards the elevators. It was so odd. I figured he must have misheard me yesterday and thought I was talking to someone else. Maybe he was hard of hearing. He looked older, probably retired. I almost said something, but then a notification popped up on my phone about a poster session I wanted to see, and I just let it go. It was probably nothing. People are weird when they travel, right? It's disorienting. I finished my coffee, tossed the cup, and headed towards the convention center. The whole thing felt off, though. Not scary, just a little unsettling, like a glitch in the background. I shook it off. It was a big city, a big conference. Weirdness was bound to happen. The convention center was loud, the kind of bright, echoing noise that makes your teeth ache. I found a spot in the back of a session on predictive modeling, not my area, honestly, but it had comfortable chairs and I needed to just sit. I kept glancing at the entrance, though. Not because I expected to see the tweed jacket guy, but I don't know, just a habit, I guess. Later, grabbing lunch, I realized I'd left my conference badge on the chair. Annoying, but not the end of the world. I went back and it was gone. Okay, someone probably just pocketed it, thinking it might be useful for the exhibit hall, irritating, but still. I reported it to the information desk, filled out a form, and figured that was that. Back in my hotel room, I was unpacking when I heard it. A scraping sound, like something being dragged across the carpet in the hallway. Slow, deliberate. It stopped right outside my door. I froze, probably just housekeeping, right? Except it was after 6 p.m., and the scraping, it wasn't the sound of a vacuum or a cart. It was heavier, rougher. I edged towards the peephole. Nothing. I waited, listening. Silence. I unlocked the door, ready to give someone a piece of my mind about disturbing guests, but the hallway was empty, except a small folded piece of paper was wedged under my door. I picked it up. It wasn't a hotel notice. It was a single typed line. Remember Dillard? Dillard. My stomach dropped. David Dillard, from grad school, a complete disaster of a person. I hadn't thought about him in years. This had to be a prank, some twisted, incredibly specific prank. But how, and why now? The note felt wrong. Not just the content, but the paper itself. Thick, expensive, like stationery someone's grandfather would use. I crumpled it in my hand, pacing. Dillard. It didn't make sense. He was pathetic, a whiner. He dropped out after his proposal got shredded, vanished. I hadn't heard a word. This had to be someone trying to mess with me, using Dillard as a bogeyman, a really weird targeted one. Then the scraping again. Not outside the door this time. Above. The ceiling, I froze. It was rhythmic, slow, like something dragging. It stopped. I told myself it was the building settling. Old hotels do that, but it started again, closer now, directly over the bed. I dove for the closet, pulling the door shut just as something gave in the ceiling. A small section of plaster, maybe 1 foot square, crashed down onto the pillow. Dust exploded. I could hear breathing. Shallow, raspy, not panicked breathing, controlled. My phone. I fumbled for it. Fingers slick with sweat. Dialing security. It rang and went to voicemail. Of course. I risked a peek through the gap in the closet door. Nothing. Just the dust settling, the hole in the ceiling. And a single playing card lying face down on the pillow. I didn't move. I couldn't. After a beat, I slowly reached out and flipped it over. The Queen of Spades. And scrawled across the back, in the same precise handwriting as the note, he remembers. I didn't wait for security, didn't even bother with my things. I just ran. Out of the room, down the hall, ignoring the stairs. Someone must have heard the crash. I didn't stop until I was outside, in the cold night air, staring back at the hotel. Maybe it was just a prank. A very elaborate, very disturbing prank, but still some disgruntled attendee with a grudge. But why Dillard? Why that card? It felt personal. The streetlights were still on when I finally stopped walking. Maybe 1 mile from the hotel. I just walked. I needed to see daylight before going back, before even thinking about going back. It felt stupid standing there shivering, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. Every parked car, every shadow. I went back around 8. Police were already there, a couple of uniforms in the lobby looking bored. My room was taped off. The officer who spoke to me, a young woman with tired eyes, kept calling it vandalism. A section of ceiling collapsing? Vandalism? She took my statement, mostly about the card, the writing on it. She didn't seem to think much of Dillard's name. She said people often bring up old grudges when things like this happen. Inside the room, it was worse than I remembered. Dust everywhere, the hole in the ceiling was clean, like someone knew exactly where to cut. They'd taken the card. I told the officer about that, about how it felt deliberate, but she just made a note. They found some plaster dust on the roof. Apparently someone had been up there recently. No footprints, though. I called Connie. She's always been good at grounding me, at being level-headed. I told her everything about Dillard, the note, the card, the ceiling. She listened, asked questions, but her tone was different, more cautious. She thought maybe someone from the conference had a vendetta against me, professional jealousy, something like that. It made a strange kind of sense. We'd presented competing research on predictive algorithms at a conference last year. I'd won the grant. Maybe it was Samit, or even Rue. They hadn't exactly been thrilled. She said she'd talked to a few people she knew at the organizing committee, see if anyone had mentioned anything. But then she paused and said, "Just be careful who you talk to about this, okay? It could be someone connected to the university. That felt off. Why would she say that? She didn't know about Dillard, not really, and the university has nothing to do with a collapsing ceiling. Does it? It's been years, I guess. I don't really talk about the conference anymore. People ask sometimes about my work, about predictive modeling. I changed the subject. It wasn't the work itself I abandoned. Not exactly. It was the feeling of being observed. It started small after I got home. Packages arrived with nothing inside. Emails came with just the Queen of Spades as an attachment. Then the calls began. Silent calls, always late at night. I went to the police again. They ran checks and said it was likely a prank. Someone messing with me. I started checking my apartment obsessively. Every shadow felt like someone was watching. I even put cameras up inside. I felt ridiculous, paranoid. I convinced myself it was grief, a delayed reaction to the stress. My grandmother had been sick around that time, and I hadn't been a very good grandson. Maybe I was just projecting. I stopped going to conferences completely. The thought of being in a strange hotel, surrounded by people I didn't know, was too much. I'd send colleagues to present on my behalf. I started working remotely as much as possible, avoiding meetings, avoiding people. I canceled my gym membership. There were too many open spaces. I saw Dillard once, a few years ago, at a grocery store. He didn't acknowledge me. He just looked through me. It was like I wasn't there. I convinced myself it was coincidence. He'd always been a bit of a ghost, even when we were classmates. Today I was walking past the university library. A student was sitting on the steps, shuffling a deck of cards. He flipped one onto the concrete. It was the Queen of Spades. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. But I still wonder what he was practicing.